Afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this opportunity to speak to a woman that's a legend, an absolute legend in the fields of impact investing and social entrepreneurship. Somebody that was talking about these fields pretty much before they existed. Uh, Jacqueline Novogratz has been named as Forbes magazine one of the greatest living business minds, also the greatest business minds of our time. And she's a TED speaker. She's an advisor for Harvard, Oxford, the NYU, and UNICEF. And she has dedicated her whole life to proving that the world can and is in fact being transformed for the better by entrepreneurs all around the world. She's the CEO of Acumen, an investing fund, a non-profit investing fund that has invested $135 million in 136 entrepreneurs all around the world, from India to Brazil, Colombia, Ethiopia, you name it. And through these investments, she has created really a new way of being and becoming an entrepreneur. So Jacqueline has published this book last year, Manifesto for a More Revolution. And just by the title, you can tell that she um, is not afraid to say swim upstream, because who in this day and age is talking about the morality of business? But business has in fact always been a moral matter. It was Margaret Thatcher, you might or might not like her, that said in 1981 that economics are the method and the object is to change the heart and soul of people. So you might or might not like Margaret Thatcher, but I think we all agree that she was a very smart woman and she knew what she was talking about. Um, so Jacqueline Novogratz has been, in fact, changing the heart and the soul of people through economics and through investing. And one of the questions that I would like to start with is, in this time, well, all the narratives around business are so focused on money. You talk about redefining success as the first step towards building a different kind of entrepreneurship. What do you mean with redefining success? Why is it necessary?
Well, thank you so much, Maria. And it's so exciting to be here. And I'm just so excited that everybody that's on this presentation with us is joining as well. I'm particularly excited to speak to you as an entrepreneur and someone who's built things, because I think that this book really is for people who want to create change, who want to contribute to building a better world. And so the reason we start with success is that I certainly grew up in a generation that was almost defined by an ideology that put money, profit, and the individual at the center of all of our systems. And while that does create real economic growth and opportunity, it also excludes the most vulnerable, the poor. It disregards the earth, and it has left us in the most divided and divisive state that I've ever experienced in my life. And so if we start by redefining success away from money, power, and fame, and instead go toward putting our shared humanity and the sustainability of the earth at the center of our systems, truly everything would change.
I think what you convey is this idea that the new idealists, the people that would have been explorers back in the early 1900s, are entrepreneurs today. And the people that you talk about in your book have this kind of feel to them, you know, that they are there where challenge a thing has to be solved. So how is patient capital, this thing that you do at Acumen, necessary to allow that kind of new definition of success? How is it necessary to make it viable?
So, as you said, Maria, the entrepreneurs of today are the seekers. They love the word impossible, and I would say that many more of them, and I meet them more and more and more every week. are starting by focus on a problem that they want to solve, how they want to serve a society, and then they're building from there. The entrepreneurs that Acumen supports are literally creating markets that have never existed. So they are working to serve people who make just a couple of dollars a day, who live in places with no electricity, very limited access to water and healthcare, who have limited skills, so hard to find the talent to build your company, and who have very little trust because they've seen people come and go for generations that have never served them. And so it's insane to think that an entrepreneur who is going to solve a problem like electricity when it has never existed is going to do so and provide significant financial returns to an investor in 3 to 5 years. And so patient capital recognizes that for too long, just government or just business as usual has failed the poor. The only way to have a really healthy society is to include the poor. And so patient capital takes philanthropy, which should be the biggest risk capital that we have, invests in entrepreneurs like the ones I'm talking about for 10 to 15 years, gives them time to try new things, fail, start again. You know this is the work of entrepreneurship, but in ways that actually allow them to build markets and allow them to help low-income people gain trust. And over time, we've seen enormous results, which we could talk about. But the money that comes back to us then gets reinvested in another innovation to the poor. And that's the model of patient capital.
And how have you seen these kind of capital grow over the years since you started Acumen back in 2001? Do you see, is there a shift in the landscape of investing in that regard, or are you still facing the same?
So it's a complicated answer in that when we started in 2001, there was no field of impact investing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And today it's $750 billion. It's nearly $1 trillion in impact investing.
Yeah.
To be honest, when I started Acumen, I thought that we were revolutionizing philanthropy. And what's interesting is that philanthropy is much slower to change. Investing saw this as a huge opportunity as people started to say, is our investing just creating damage? And so I would say yes, in that there's been a huge mind shift, and that there's now a field and a new generation that are saying to their parents, why are we not investing for impact? In terms of patient capital, that philanthropic back long-term, it's also grown not as fast as it needs to grow. And the reason is because it's so hard. Literally 10 to 15 years. The big successes aren't like the Googles because you're working with people who've been left out and marginalized for so long. Yeah. But I think that's the wrong metric, because if you look at the 135 million that we've invested on the patient capital side, we've helped move about 750 million. In other words, investments have come into our companies once we've helped make them a little bit safer. And so that's $1 billion moved into markets that are new, serving people who've been left out. So from that perspective, yes, the world has changed. Yeah. Acumen also has for-profit facilities, which are still more, I dare say, impact-driven and impact first. So we're also starting to see a spectrum of capital develop that I think is healthy.
Yeah. So throughout your book, you kind of debunk or at least propose a different paradigm for many, many things within entrepreneurship. One of them is that you say to try and solve humanity's toughest problems requires no single hero, but a system of people. And I love this idea because there's so much that's built around this idea of unicorns that is really wasteful, right? Like we're expecting one company to succeed at the price of everybody else's falling. And that might be very good for the company, but it doesn't solve the problems. And it's unbelievable, but your book is the first place where I found this idea, and I was like, my eyes were welling with tears when I read it.
Oh,
So what do you mean? Um, Solving humanity's toughest problems requires no single hero.
so I completely agree with you. When we look at the unicorn, the Steve Jobs, the Bill Gates, not only does it let the rest of us off the hook, it creates impossible standards.
Mhm.
And in this field of social entrepreneurship, we end up putting people up on stages before they've actually built something that really matters. And so often we destroy their focus. We make the rest of the world feel terrible,
Mhm.
and it doesn't serve any of us.
Mhm.
This idea that we need a million heroic acts and not another hero is that our problems are too big to lead to any individual or any one institution.
Mhm.
And that's also, I think, coming back to me and our own humility, that
Mhm.
it's easy to start to think that, well, we could do this if we did this and that, and then we built that, instead of saying, well, with whom could we solve this problem? And I've learned a lot from the next generation, including the Acumen Academy fellows in Spain, Maria, and
Mhm.
Colombia, um, where they talk about themselves as the critical yeast, that they recognize it's only when you bring groups together to take on a problem collectively, um, that the problem doesn't have a chance of getting solved. So
Mhm.
this year in the pandemic, because we have grown to be the largest investor for off-grid solar energy for the poor, um, when we saw how many tens of thousands of jobs were being lost and companies were being closed, we knew that we couldn't set up a loan facility by ourselves, but we catalyzed a facility with 100 other institutions, 100.
Mhm.
Oh no, 20 other, I was like 100, 20 other institutions to try and raise $100 million facility. It ended up being about 90, and we hope to announce it publicly quite soon. But it's amazing to see what can happen if you coalesce around solving a problem together.
Mhm. And another thing that you talk about in your book is how, related to this idea of a system of people, is that most investing firms require entrepreneurs to have a certain volume or expect a certain volume right away to be investable. And that is, in fact, one of the toughest challenges for social entrepreneurs. I think that if you're not looking to get that kind of scale right away, you're off the radar for the system. And you explain in your book, and I'm also going to say that there are so many first person examples in the book that are incredibly inspiring, I think, for first time entrepreneurs. But you talk about how you approach small entrepreneurs and you trust them in the long term, even if they're not scaling until they're sure of how to scale, right? And how you try to convey that to the rest of the system as well. So, how do you pay the attention that small entrepreneurs need um, for those first years of their operation where they don't know what to do? You talk about humility, right?
Right. I think what comes down to is finding the right entrepreneur. And by that, I mean the entrepreneurs that have the character that, that practice many of the things we talk about in the book, that the humility that you're talking about, first and foremost, that they don't come into communities thinking they have the answer, but they're willing to use what we would call the moral imagination. They can see the problem they want to solve, but they have the humility to realize that the problem would be solved if it were easy. And so they get, right? So they get close, they immerse, they listen to people, and they treat particularly marginalized, vulnerable people as full human beings, as customers, even if they'll have to possibly create a below market price that people can afford. And so the best example of that would be these two guys, Sam Goldman and Ned Tozin. who had this crazy audacious dream that they were going to help eradicate kerosene from the world when 1.5 billion people used kerosene that they paid 50 cents per day to use. And it worked for poor people who only had a few cents in their pocket because they could pay if they had the money. And if they didn't, they went a night without light. Sam and Ned had experience in Africa and India where they started, but they didn't know how much would people pay for solar light that they had never seen before. As I said, there were no roads. There was a lot of corruption. And the kerosene, the people who controlled kerosene were a powerful group because it was $100 billion industry. Mm-hmm. And so they did not want to see solar come in and take over their business. So you have to fight the status quo. And these guys sort of had a business plan, but we didn't bet on that. What we bet on was their humility, their audacity, their willingness to listen and take feedback. And we saw them as partners and every step along the way. And now we're with them for 14 years. We watched them shift. They failed a lot. So did we. But we kept letting the work teach us. And today that company has brought 100 million people light and electricity. Literally starting from university to 14 years later, where we are today.
Yeah. And exactly, you talk about, you say at one point in the book that your book is not meant as a roadmap for entrepreneurs, but I found that it is precisely a moral roadmap for entrepreneurs.
Thank you for that.
And in the first pages, you say, where do you start? Where you started? You say, just start and let the work teach you. And that's also counterintuitive because we've heard many times in business that we have to prepare thoroughly and be absolutely sure of what we want to do before we start. So why is that? Why do you think people should start as soon as possible and let the work teach them? What does that mean?
Because these big, sticky questions, the biggest challenges of our world, which are really the challenges that are most worth living for and working on, have no easy answers. And so I grew up in a generation that had experts. Let's bring in the expert. Mm-hmm. And I have this great visual image of who the experts were. And they were often so disconnected from any of the on-ground realities that it was laughable to me. And so when I started Acumen, it was very clear we were not, nor would we ever be experts. We would forever keep a childlike curiosity and be seekers. And so I don't understand what it means to say know everything before you start when it's impossible. It's just as it's tautologically impossible. The other piece to this is that people often think they have to wait to know what their purpose is before they start. And so to them, I would also say, get started, see what happens, let the work teach you. Mm-hmm. I knew by the time I started Acumen, because I had started many times and I'd already had many failures. I knew that I wanted to experiment with this crazy idea of taking philanthropy and making investments. No one had done it. The Internal Revenue Service in the United States did not want to give me registration. They had never seen an organization that looked like this. So even that was an education. And then now I'm totally prepared that we're going to go out, we're going to start this work. And we couldn't find anything to invest in, nothing. We looked at 700 organizations, but there weren't social enterprises at that point that could take on this kind of capital. And then a really wise man, a CEO, said, just start, Jacqueline. You're waiting for the perfect deal. And you should aim for mediocrity. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Raise all this money. I have all these people counting on me and I'm trying to do something revolutionary and you're telling me to aim for mediocrity? He's like, well, you'll probably fail anyway. So just get the pain over with. Just do it. He was right. We failed. We learned so much from that first electromagnetic immunosensor that I didn't even understand. But It taught me really quickly. If you don't understand the technology, do not invest in it. Um, and we went from there. Just start.
And you talk about letting curiosity be a major driver for your journey. And you emphasize a lot the use of empathy and getting in somebody else's shoes. And all of that part, when you talk about being in somebody else's shoes and how privilege is a roadblock for understanding other people. I think it's just brilliant. So what does it mean to visualize yourself in somebody else's shoes and working from empathy to action? What's your how-to for starting a business from curiosity?
That's a great question. It goes with this idea of immersion. Get close, pay attention, listen, not just with your ears, but with all of your senses. I find that people will often tell you the truth if you ask questions in a way that convey convey respect and a willingness to listen to their stories. Don't start just with a notebook asking them the questions that you want to hear, but acknowledge who they are, why you're there. The idea for us, again, goes to this notion of moral imagination. We're never going to fully understand if we're privileged, what it feels like to be a mom whose child is sick and doesn't even have the 10 cents that she needs to buy the malaria pill. That level of fear, that level of desperation is at extraordinary levels. But we can sit and let her tell her story and acknowledge what she's saying, so that she feels seen and so that we better understand what she might need, what she might value. Maria, when we first started, I was swimming in a world of shoulds, what people should do. And so people should drink clean water. Who can disagree with that? But if you are in a rural village and you believe that water comes from God and God will decide if you get sick or not, and you have to make a decision, do I send my child to school or do I pay for clean water? Chances are you're going to send your child to school. And so
it might be the right decision too. It might be the right decision too.
And it might be the right decision. And so rather than sit in judgment, have the humility to see the world as it is. Work from there. Find a solution. But too often we sit in judgment. I literally sat with someone in Guatemala. This is like 30 years ago. And a great, great guy. So this is not, I'm not putting him in the bad guy category. Great guy. And we were talking to this wonderful couple, and there were like 8 kids running up back and forth in this one room house. And at one point, the woman went to go put some water on the fire outside. And then the guy turned to me and he said, Jacqueline, where do they sleep together? Husband and the wife. I said, well, where do you think? And he's like, I mean, where's their room? I said, it's here with all the kids. And he's like, oh my goodness, I would build another house. It's like, I'm sure they would too, if they could. That was not a good example of the moral imagination.
No. Yeah. Exactly. And you talk
but
about.
We do it all the time, Lydia, right? Why are these people so late to the meeting? And then if you just say, oh, it's raining outside, how'd you have to get here? Oh, well, I had to take 3 buses and the bus broke down and okay, maybe I'll come to you next time.
Yeah, I think the most striking example of that is when we have to think about people, about moms that have gone through excruciatingly painful events with their children, like like you talk about the Rwandan genocide, and immediately there is like a resort that protects you that says those moms must not care about their children as much as we do. Because if I had to go through a tenth of what that woman has gone through, I would have gone crazy. But that is, of course, not true. Like, it's a story that we tell ourselves to be able to put up with such horrors that we can't even begin to imagine, rather than face that those people are suffering excruciating pain. But yeah, that is exactly, privilege is a roadblock, you say in your book, for understanding. And that's crazy, because understanding your client, whoever it might be, is the first key to building a good business.
That's right. And if your client looks like you, it's not as hard.
Maybe, yeah.
And that's one of the reasons too many of us use the lens only of our own imagination.
Yeah, exactly.
And moral imagination really asks you to go further, to put yourself and ask who other people are. And I'd say start from a place that we see people, all people, neither above us nor below us, but as part of us.
Yeah.
And
you talk about non-conformism, and you talk about how you had to break up with the projection that everybody, and probably yourself, had made about your life, and how that is a must if anybody wants to do something uh, like relevant in their lives, or probably not relevant but meaningful in their life, because there are so many constraints and so many people and family and friends that are going to judge what we like if we try to step out of the way. And you moved to Africa age 25 and left a job at a banking firm, right? It must have been like impossible to make that decision, to tell mom, I'm never going to have a house in the suburbs. I'm going to Africa to create a microfinance project with people I don't know, and I don't even know where to start with it. How did you do that?
Well, it's interesting, and I work now in so many societies where it would be equally as hard as it was for me, because at that point there was no internet, no cell phones. I was going to a place where I wouldn't even have a telephone. So my parents knew that when I was leaving, I was really leaving. And I'm from a family of 7, big Catholic immigrant family. So very, keep the children close.
Yeah.
It was quite shocking to my parents. But I also trusted the love that my parents had. And I think that's probably one of the great privileges I had, was that I knew that this was a safe family that would ultimately support me. And I know that not everybody has that. And so I also want to recognize that. There was a drive in me to know the world, and I always had it. And I wanted to love the world. And so I cried a lot. My mother was sure I was never going to get married, and my father was sure I was never going to have another good job again. And yet, when I look back, Maria, I actually think that was one of the most courageous conversations. And it started to teach me how to be more courageous. And it's why I talk about the need to practice courage, and that it's sometimes within our own families where we have to find these deep reserves of courage that can end up forming who we might become in terms of then changing the world around us.
And then for a last question, because we have to leave it here in 2 minutes. Most books just leave it here and talk about the idealistic part of building a business, but you add one last part to your book that I think is very important. And you say, if entrepreneurs are not careful, they're going to end up doing the same market practices that are not changing anything. So one must keep an eye always on like keeping track of the social progress that you're
The
taking?
North Star.
Hmm. How is that practice? How do you do it? How do you make sure that you're not just doing business as usual?
I think the world has 1,000 ways to take our courage away and to take our resolve, our resolution away from us. We too often look at others and compare ourselves. One of my favorite lines of poetry is so many are raised to the rank of prince by the slippery ease of their light judgment. And that's true. And when you look around the world today, so many of our leaders are there because they're really good at lying, because they're really good at politicking, because they're really good at winning at the expense of others losing, because they cannot be right unless other people are wrong. And most of us don't want to be those leaders. Until we've changed what leadership looks like and what business looks like, those of us who make the decision that we are going to be different are signing up for a hard path. At times, it's a lonely path. And I have a lot of stories about that. And yet, it is a path that not only leads to a deep sense of fulfillment and meaning, and if you're lucky, impacting millions of people or even just a few people. But the piece that we also don't hear about, at least not when we're starting, is that no matter how hard it gets and no matter how ugly it gets, and as you said, I went through a genocide, it doesn't get uglier than that. Even in the darkest times, there's beauty to be found. And I would actually assert that in this moment of a global pandemic where there's so much darkness, so much loss, so much pain, so is there a chance for us to find our most beautiful selves, our best selves, and to bring light into that world. And that is the job of every one of you on this call, and that is the job of every one of us.
Thank you very, very much for joining us today. You've been so inspiring. You've been not just today, but throughout your career, and it's been an absolute honor for all of us to have you here. Thank you very much, Jacqueline. I'm going to say it again. This is the book, Manifesto for a Moral Revolution. If you are an aspiring entrepreneur, you're going to be coming back to this book over and over again because it has so many tips and so many ideas and so many thoughts that are going to get you like pushing forward. So thank you very much. I have to say two things right now. One of them is that the connectors can now join the Zoom connection, the Zoom room, to follow our conversation, to continue with our conversation, and then that everybody else, apparently you have to be on the Q&A on Discord at 5:30. And now that I've fulfilled my duties with these two things that I've been terrified of forgetting since the first minute, I'm going to say bye to you. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. And thank you again, Jacqueline. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been my pleasure too. And anyone in Spain that's interested as well. Acumen Academy, Spain, is an extraordinary group of our fellows. And online, we have many Spanish courses and English, including the Path of Moral Leadership, which is the master course for the book. And so just check out the website. Thank you. And Maria, I look forward to staying in touch with you. So I get off now.
No, I think you stay on, and then some other people are going to join us.
Perfect. That's what I thought. And then I got confused. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, not so easy as it looks.